My Lords, that concludes oral questions for today. Private notice question on the execution of protesters in Iran. Lord Scriven.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask a question of which I have given private notice. The question is as follows. To ask His Majesty's Government what assessment they have made of reports that the Iranian regime is carrying out executions against anti-government protesters.
My Lords, I'm sure the House shares the outrage expressed by the Foreign Secretary on Thursday at the Iranian regime's execution of protesters. Mohsen Shekari and Majreza Ranavad are tragic victims of a legal system in which disproportionate sentences and forced confessions are rife. The UK is working with international partners to hold Iran to account, including by sanctioning last week 10 judges and prison officials. Iran must be in no doubt that the world is watching. It cannot continue to unleash violence against its own people to stifle voices of dissent.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord, the Minister, for that answer. But two brave 23-year-old Iranians standing up for democracy and women's rights have been brutally murdered on jumped-up charges by those in power in Iran. As the head of the Norwegian body Human Rights Watch said, if these executions are not met with serious consequences for the Iranian government, we will face mass executions of protesters. So what extra serious consequences are the government going to inflict on the Iranian regime?
May I just start by acknowledging, as I'm sure we all do in different ways, the breathtaking courage of protesters in Iran, particularly the women, whose every act of defiance comes with the risk of extreme persecution, even death. It's really something to behold. Now, the UK, of course, condemns Iranian government activities, not least the executions that we're discussing now. And across international fora, we're calling Iran out at every opportunity and amplifying the voice of those protesters. We've condemned the regime's crackdown on protesters alongside G7 partners and at the UN Human Rights Council and the General Assembly and Security Council. We're working alongside the US and partners to remove Iran from the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And on a bilateral level, we continue to challenge Iran's reprehensible actions at every opportunity. That includes summoning Iran's representative in the UK to the Foreign Office on numerous occasions. On Friday, on 9th of December, just a few days ago, the UK announced sanctions on 10 officials connected to Iran's judicial and prison systems, including judges linked to the Revolutionary Court, which sentenced those two people to death. On the 14th of November, we announced sanctions on 24 leading political and security officials involved in the current crackdown on protesters. And in October, we sanctioned the morality police in its entirety, as well as its leader and 5 other officials responsible for human rights violations. We take Iran's reprehensible actions very, very seriously indeed.
My Lords, I listened carefully to the Foreign Secretary's speech this morning on this positive and forward-looking speech, but there was no mention of Iran at all. And Iran are, as my noble friend the Minister said, are a serious danger. I have 2 points. One is my noble friend mentioned the Commission on Women's Rights. I understand that there is a vote on Wednesday in the UN. Can my noble friend assure me that we will vote the right way? And secondly, whilst the list was long of things that we've done, surely now is time that we prescribe the IRGC. It has to be done.
The Noble Lord makes an important point and a powerful point. It's not for me to discuss individual cases in relation to prescriptions, but the Foreign Office and my colleagues will have heard what he had to say. And what he's had to say echoes what many others in this place have said on various occasions. In relation to the vote that's coming up in the next few days, yes, I can assure the Noble Lord that we will be voting the right way.
Lords, although these executions are an outrage, they are not the only judicial outrage perpetrated by the government of Iran. Will Her Majesty's government pursue the injustice of extending the sentence of the longest-serving prisoners of conscience in the world, the 69 and 60-year-old women of the Baha'i faith, Fariba Kamalabadi and Mavazje Sabit for nothing other than professing their religion.
My Lords, the Iranian regime has a long and dark record when it comes to persecution of minorities, religious minorities, but also the LGBT community, and, as we've already discussed, anyone who in any way stands up to the regime. The atrocities that the Noble Baroness has just referenced are really a par for the course for a regime which is really beyond the pale in its actions towards anyone who is not part of the mainstream establishment within Iran.
My Lords, the Noble Lord, my Lords, the Noble Lord has emphasised that he's working with international partners on this issue. Could you please tell the House what conversations they've had with Pakistan and Armenia, both countries that voted at the UN Human Rights Council against establishing an independent investigation into these human rights violations? And have they had any conversations in light of the large amounts of ODA that those countries are in receipt of, thanks to the British taxpayer?
My Lords, I can't. My assumption would be yes, those discussions are happening, but I don't know that because I'm not party to them. But I will convey her question to the minister responsible, who was not able to be here today to answer this question.
Was it? Executions are obviously intended also to intimidate the population of Iran, and I share with the minister's admiration, particularly of the women and young women within the population. Further to the immediate question about the resolution S35-1 to establish an independent international fact-finding mission, I also noted that Qatar and the UAE abstained. So what discussions has His Majesty's government been having with our allies in the Gulf with regards to very considerable mixed messages of supporting pro-democracy groups, especially women and children? And what practical support will the government be providing to the independent international fact-finding mission for it to have any teeth whatsoever?
My Lords, as before, those discussions with representatives from Qatar and the UAE and others are regular and ongoing. But as I said in my answer to a previous question, those are not discussions that I personally have been having, so I can't provide an authoritative answer, but I will include a response to that question when I follow up to the previous one.
My Lords,
My Lords, the news of the executions in Iran is deeply concerning and heartbreaking. I declare an interest as someone who comes originally from Iran and still has friends and loved ones there. There are likely to be many more executions still to come, with a dozen death sentences already issued. I'd be grateful if the Noble Lord the Minister could outline what support the government is providing to Iranians in the UK who are seeking to ensure the safety of loved ones in Iran.
My Lords, it is, as Noble Lords will know, it's not always the case that those who've been arrested and held by the Iranian regime contact the UK government either directly or through their family, and not everyone requests support from the British government, but where that support is requested, the UK government does everything it possibly can to try to exert pressure and facilitate the speedy resolution of whatever the particular case is. But it's not. I can't go into individual cases. There are one or two that I personally have been involved in. I can tell you that dealing with the Iranian regime is incredibly difficult at every step of the way, as the Noble Baroness will know.
Lords, was it not absurd that Iran was put on this UN Women's Commission in the first place, given its long record? The problem surely is that the Iranian regime believe now that they are in an existential fight for survival, and therefore certainly we on our own, have no influence. So what, in addition to the efforts the government has set out thus far, what are we doing to seeking to isolate Iran? Where, if any, are the pressure points which might possibly influence the regime?
Well, as the UK maintains a wide range of sanctions designed to constrain Iran's destabilizing activity within the wider region, we work in the multilateral fora to exactly that, to attempt to encourage the world as much as possible to speak with one voice in condemnation of Iran, with some success, but not entirely. In November this year, we supported a successful Human Rights Council resolution establishing a mechanism to investigate the regime's actions. We'll work with partners to ensure it delivers for the Iranian people. But may I just add, though, that broadly, in relation to the first point the Noble Lord made, that the truth is that there does remain a place in the international community for a responsible Iran, one that respects the rights and freedoms of its people. And across international fora, and working closely with our partners, we will continue to expose the regime's appalling human rights violations, pursue accountability, and amplify the voice of Iranian people.
My Lords, is it not very significant indeed that members of the Ayatollah's own family have denounced these barbaric practices? And should we not give real publicity to what has been said about him by them?
The Noble Lord makes an important point. I mean, in the sewer that is Twitter, the one shining light is that its ability to transmit and convey images of really staggering bravery on the part of these protesters. I think without social media, it's very hard to see how the world would be as awake to what's happening in Iran as they are. So whenever I find myself feeling gloomy about the filth on that social media site, I remind myself that it does have an incredible role to play. That these protests are a pivotal moment for Iran. The Iranian people have made it clear that they'll no longer tolerate violence and oppression. The UK stands with ordinary Iranians who are, as I said, bravely risking their lives to demand a better future. And this is an authentic grassroots call for change. The regime has to stop threatening the lives of ordinary people in Iran and indeed elsewhere, including the UK.
My Lords, can I ask, first question, can I ask, did the Foreign Secretary raise with the Iranian Chargé d'Affaires on Friday the question of threats to UK nationals and free press people in this country, which I know I'd asked the Noble Lord last week about? Did he raise that? Secondly, what does the Noble Lord the Minister think of the Foreign Secretary's speech today when he says it's not about dictating or telling others what they should do, we want to balance a mutually beneficial relationship? Is this not sending mixed messages? Is it putting things like trade above human rights?
No, absolutely not. The UK's position on Iran has been rock solid now for a very considerable period of time, and there's no question of the UK in any way softening its approach to the behaviour of the Iranian regime. The issue of Iran's extra-national activities, particularly in relation to British nationals here in the UK, was of course raised. And I know that members of the House of Lords, Noble Lord Alton, I've discovered today, has been I'm not sure there's any country that hasn't sanctioned Noble Lord Alton, but he was sanctioned as well, I understand, today. And I have to say that one, that's a tribute to his own relentless campaigning on human rights issues in Iran but elsewhere. And two, I suspect, like him, that the rest of the House will treat such a move with the contempt that it deserves.
My Lords, the present revolution or resistance in Iran results from the cruel treatment of the brave women of Iran. The National Council for Iranian Resistance, led by a woman, has put forward a 10-point plan for democracy, which includes an absence of any sort of religious rule, a secular democracy, and a freedom of belief for all, and equal rights for women. Would the Noble Lord the Minister agree that that is the right way for the direction of travel in Iran?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, in Iran already, the law, it does provide some protections. Not, a Jewish community, for example, has protection within the constitution. In reality, it's meaningless. If you are a member of the Jewish community in Iran, you will, at the very, very most, keep your head firmly down. So that the protection provided in law is not protection that's provided in practice. But of course, that's a direction of travel that we want. And I would just add that for decades, the morality police have used the threat of detention and violence to control what Iranian women wear, how they behave in public. And as the Iranian people have made clear, that institution as well is intolerable. And there were announcements, as noble lords will know, or suggestions that the morality police will be disbanded, and we must hope that that is the case.
My Lords, in response to my noble friend Lord Scriven's question, the noble Lord the Minister gave a list of very welcome actions that are being taken by this government. But can you say now that these executions are happening right now, over the past few days, and are continuing? Some are children. Could you say what extra actions are going to be taken, are being taken, in the light of these continuing atrocities?
Mm-hmm. My Lords, there's a whole range of activities and actions that the UK can take bilaterally, which I've already mentioned in relation to sanctions and trying to squeeze as much as possible those responsible at the highest levels within the regime. Multilateral activity of the sort that I mentioned earlier. There are Iranian protesters who look to the UK for safe passage, and that is something which we provide, but a system that no doubt can be improved in any number of ways. And we take a measured approach to engaging both with Iranian civil society and the diaspora here in the UK. We're clear that ultimately the choice of Iran's government is a matter for the Iranian people, but we will do everything we can to ensure that